you can see this is one layer. So I do all this on one pass, and then I go over on another animation pass and I add highlight layer to give it a little bit more dimensionality. Just like kind of abstract, loosey-goosey, animated straight ahead. And then I'm going to show you my process for animating one of these. And go like this. Then go over here. And then curve around. And then link up back to the beginning. And I'm just going to draw like really rough timing chart to remind myself. Like right here, it's gonna be eased in, going slower. Then it's gonna speed up. And then decelerate here. And then slow out or ease out into a faster with wider spacing. This is the acceleration phase. And then it's gonna more or less keep its speed as it goes around. It's gonna get a little slower on the curve, and then just zoom back up and then slow back over here. So this is my motion path guide. It's kind of less stressful to just animate weird little blobby stuff because you don't have proportions or like specific parts of a character to deal with. I'm gonna go over on and do more in-betweens later, but for now I'm literally just getting some keyframes in here. It's almost like a bouncing ball type of shape, and it stretches on when it's going faster, and then it's gonna get more returning to its regular circular shape. But I'm also gonna have the volume expanding and stuff, so it's not gonna really be like a perfect type of bouncing ball where you'd want the volume to remain consistent. You know, as it stretches, it gets skinnier. As it squashes, it gets wider, but it maintains its overall volume. This one, I'm kind of just doing whatever I want because it's like this kind of magical liquid type of thing. And I'm gonna have it break apart here and stretch. And it's going to be going fast around this curve. Just see what it looks like so far. Whoop, I gotta lower this frame rate. I'll lower it to 6 frames per second for now. I have been trying to sometimes watch romantic movies, I guess. Like Jane Austen. Sometimes I've seen a few of those ones. I've noticed most romantic movies, of course, most movies in general, conflict is the driving force of the story. Conflict is the engine that propels the story forward. Without conflict, you don't have a very interesting story, usually. These are just like the common formula for stories is you have to have conflict. And characters that want something and an obstacle or antagonist that prevents them from getting that thing that they want. So with romance movies, the thing that the main character wants is find true love. So of course the obstacle has to be everything that prevents that from happening. And I've noticed that the main thing that prevents that from happening is miscommunication. And I've noticed that these Jane Austen movies, so much pain and suffering comes from characters not being completely honest, or they say things that they don't really mean on the surface. So it's a lot of subtext. It's what is the character saying versus what is the character really saying. And so I'm watching those, I'm like, well, all your problems would be solved if you all just said what you need to say. But then there'd be no movie. So you have to have miscommunications. And of course, miscommunication is inevitable. Even if you weren't speaking in code, like a lot of the fancy Jane Austen characters do, their flowery language. Conflict is inevitable because we're imperfect creatures. And sometimes we don't even know what we're trying to say. So yeah, another reason I like doing these kind of goopy loopy stuff is it's really fast just to get anything going. And it's appealing and generally fun to look at because it's just the joy of pure raw motion. It's just movement, raw movement. There's no character, there's no mind, there's no nothing. It's just physics of something weird that you can move your hand around and dazzle the eyeballs, dazzle the eye cells. And it also kind of works well for live event visuals because if you don't have a super clear theme that you're animating, then it actually has a pretty wide application for different uses. Like an abstract shape can be used in a rave dance party just as it could be hung up in a dentist's office. But if you have a specific subject matter, like say the beach with like a sandcastle, then that's just so incredibly specific that it doesn't have as wide of an application of uses. But the pro to that, of course, is that if someone wants a sandcastle on a beach, well then that's what they want. So I need to copy and paste my first frame, bring it up to the end here so I can get this looping correctly. So when I start out here, you can see the spacing is way wider than when it's coming over here. So right over here I can pretty much add one in between and it'll be fine. But at the beginning here, I need to add more frames. So I'm gonna go to add exposure, get the timing better on this. Delete the middle. I'm gonna be live streaming every day, possibly. Well, here's the thing about making plans. Sometimes I make plans and then I forget that I made the plans, if I'm doing it under the pressure of speaking and drawing at the same time. But I'm going to probably live stream almost every day or possibly every day, I don't know. And just so you can see fossil record of what I'm working on. And you can also draw along or do your own thing at the same time. Because I like to listen to live streams or just like even people just playing video games or something while I'm working. It's one thing, working on art can be a very isolating activity. You're often alone while doing it. Or even if you're with other people, you still have to be in your own head to think about what you're making. But especially if you're literally physically alone, like I am, just alone in my apartment, that can be pretty isolating even for a super introvert like myself. So just hearing the voice of other living creatures, it helps you to feel less alone. Also, I like listening to live streams of other people who are basically alone live streaming because there's a certain camaraderie with it, where you feel like you're two aliens in your own spaceships receiving messages from each other. Even if geographically you're far away, it can feel like you're less far away because talking, it transmits ideas into the listener's mind. So I'm literally using my consciousness to make little sounds out of my mouth that enter your brain and change your own consciousness. It's really strange, isn't it, that we can affect each other's conscious experience just by talking to each other. It's kind of like a form of magic or alchemy. These words that we say are really literally spells that we cast on people. You can make a spell that gets someone to empty the dishwasher just by getting the correct words out and the correct inflection and tone and body language. You can say things and people will either they'll have their own response. Sometimes that response will be the opposite of what you want. And that, in a way, is still having an influence on them because they're acting in opposition to what you're saying, which is also a really strange thing to think about. This is the power of having a motion guide, just having something on a held layer that shows the path of action, especially when you're doing kind of trippy straight ahead stuff where you don't have key poses. It helps make sure that whatever you're drawing is going to end up where you want it to. In this case, I wanted it to become a seamless loop, so this helps get that motion in. So I don't really need this back thing anymore. So now the next thing I normally do after I get the main shapes in is just do another look at it. And of course I'll polish this up, later. And then I'm going to select all the frames and flip them horizontally, so that now when I'm going over adding the in-betweens, I'll also be able to look at the shapes from a fresh perspective and notice if anything kind of sticks out awkwardly. Even like when doing more abstract effects type stuff, it still matters. Like if something looks good flipped both ways, then that's how you know that the design is probably working. But if you flip it and it suddenly looks really weird, then that means that you didn't catch what was looking weird, because often we can kind of just get used to whatever we're drawing. I'm going to turn the light box off now, and I guess I'm kind of polishing up some of these lines, but really I should probably do the in-betweens first and then go over and polish up all the lines. So I'm actually gonna not worry about that right now, but let's just see here. So on animatedloop.com/courses, where I currently have a fire course. It's the only animation course I've made so far, but the fire course is 2 hours. It has 10 videos. It teaches you how to animate fire, flames, smoke, and candles, and how to rotoscope fire in a way that is appealing and create strong shape design. And that course also comes with 22 fire loops that you can use in your own projects. So when I do the in-betweens, I usually zoom in a little bit, not like to 100%, but just to where I can be sure that I'm getting a smooth transition between shapes. But as you could see before, when I was drawing the main animation, I was not zoomed in, because you wanna see the full scope of the poses a little better when you're blocking in stuff. If you're zoomed in all the way when you're trying to block in stuff, then you lose a lot of perspective and your judgment becomes a little warped. And I'm also looking at the previous 2 frames on my onion skinning or light box so that I can judge the spacing between these frames, make sure that things are not going to be stuttering if you have things that are too close and then randomly too far away. I want to make sure there's a smooth transition between close and far away, or fast and slow motion. Have things progressively accelerate. As in nature, things rarely just start or stop at full speed. Either unless it's like a robot, or even like machines though, like a car for instance obviously can't start out at full speed. It has to accelerate and get up to that point. And this is even more so with organic living things. And these are all going to be a solid block of color, so I'm not really concerned about this sort of messy line work because it's not going to have lines when it's colored. More about the overall mass and the shape. But if you're just getting into animation, just animating like blobby, circular, liquidy things is really a good way to practice. And it's also a little bit less intimidating than doing complicated characters. And of course you can always say turn this into a character later. I mean, you could add a face to it, you give it eyeballs, Basically, if you give anything an eye, it immediately becomes alive. Doesn't matter what it is. This should be on 15 frames a second now. Basically, the output is going to be on 30 frames a second, but I'm animating this on 2s. So you just divide that by 30 and it's 15 drawings per second. The thing that sucks about insomnia, of course, is that you're so tired, but you can't fall asleep. And then, of course, there's the type of insomnia where you don't feel tired, but you actually are still sleep deprived, even if your brain is racing and your body doesn't feel tired. Your energy is actually depleted. There's a higher level of cortisol, which is probably why you don't feel tired, is because you have these stress hormones that are circulating, keeping you up with anxiety. And of course, the more tired you are, the less active your prefrontal cortex is, which is a snowball effect because your frontal lobes are literally what helps to calm you down when you're feeling stressed. It's the part of the brain that allows you to regulate your own emotions. So when this part of the brain is basically offline, then it's a feedback loop of you're feeling more stressed, and then you can't calm yourself down from the stress, and that stresses you out more as well. This little goopy part on the butt shoots out. It's like a little particle. I'm gonna have this kind of go on an arc, and then it's gonna shrink, and it's going to dissipate. Just doing this straight ahead. It's very important if you are an artist, or really anyone that works at a desk, so really just anyone, to take frequent breaks and to stretch your arms. I've definitely noticed when I don't do my daily stretches, sometimes I wake up in the night and my forearms are numb. Sometimes I have a stinging feeling around my forearms and elbow area. I recently watched this one by Van Buren. I might be mispronouncing that, but he had the Fable Studios, which was a competitor to Disney. Well, everyone was a competitor to Disney, but in the 1930s, and they did these short films called The Rainbow Parade, and it was basically like a spiritual successor or rival to Disney's Silly Symphonies. They're just like silly short films that are kind of driven by music. Not always, but maybe less driven by the music than the Silly Symphonies. But it's a similar type of spirit of just pure rubber hose joy. And one of them, Panic Picnic, for instance, heavily inspired Cuphead. You can check it out on YouTube. I think it's called Picnic Panic. And yeah, the Elder Kettle, his prototype design is literally the kettle character in that film. And there's even some little cup characters who are very reminiscent of Cuphead. And yeah, it's definitely a huge inspiration on Cuphead, as was Iwerks, of course, and all Felix the Cat, all those classic 1920s, 1930s rubber hose stuff. But yeah, it's pretty appealing, pretty weird, just kind of the vibe I am enjoying a lot at the moment. So I'm wanting to make a cartoon that's basically a rubber hose short film that will not necessarily be like a spiritual successor to all that stuff, but it's the rubber hose style, but with a little bit more epic, or not epic, but a coherent type of storyline. But it'll still be weird, but it won't just be gags. It'll have a beginning, middle, and end. And because I want to try to start working on more narrative stuff, as opposed to just stream of consciousness, dream content all the time, which I enjoy doing. but I feel like animation is more than just weird or interesting visuals. Nothing wrong with that, but as a storytelling medium, there's a lot of potential there that I feel like I have not been able to experiment with at the depth that I'd like to. So that's going to be something to focus on this year. Quick tip on coloring in TV Paint: create a new layer, create the color you want to fill in, drag out the color layer all the way to the end, click the paint bucket tool on the screen somewhere it won't touch the line work, then select all the frames and then click enter or return on your keyboard, and it'll automatically repeat the flood fill process to fill in the entire screen. Go to your flood bucket tool, select color to erase, put it on the erase mode, then go to your source and select above. Now it'll erase everything above that's below the line work tool. So now I'm gonna just hit this bottom corner where it won't touch the line work, and then I'm gonna select all the frames, and I'm gonna click return or enter on the keyboard, and it's going to automatically fill in all the frames. This is much quicker than having to go by frame on the keyboard and trying to color in everything. So now everything's filled in. Of course, I'm already noticing there's some, like, I'll zoom in more. You can see like this isn't very nice, this line work, because I did it so fast. There's little parts that I need to smooth over frame by frame. This kind of stuff I will zoom in all the way because I've already got all the proportions and everything drawn. Now it's just a matter of touching up things. So in this case I can zoom in to 100% without, being worried that I'm going to be having odd in-betweens or odd proportions on stuff. But I'll actually go over on my own when I'm not streaming and do this thing, because it's a little tedious and not really necessary to worry about right now. I'm going to lock these layers so I don't accidentally draw on it. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to go to white, and this will be my cel shade layer. And I guess the light is going to be coming up from the kind of upper left. So this, I'm just going to be drawing in like a little highlight thing. And of course this one, as you can see, I'll be filling it in later. So it'll look like this when it's done, but I'll do that on its own pass. I'll also probably have some light down here, frame by frame, not even worrying about my light box right now. Just going one frame at a time. So now as this thing is stretching, you'll notice that I'm also stretching the highlight. Basically the highlight is influenced by the body of the mass of this thing I'm making. So the highlight doesn't exist in isolation of what it rests on, but rather it is part of it. It's getting stretched out and skinny now. I'm actually going to have it kind of start to slow down. The highlight is going to be not catching up with the rest of it. I'm going to have it sort of disappear as the back end of this blob keeps going. The highlight is going to be shrinking until it just becomes like a little spectral light, and it's going to gradually get smaller and smaller till it disappears. Let's see what this looks like so far. Alright, that looks pretty cool. And as I have these highlights kind of disappear, I'm going to have other highlights that are starting to emerge to counter it. It's going to start to come up from the bottom here and stretch apart. Start to come back up, kind of taking the space that previous highlight was taking. Oh yeah, this you can see I'm definitely going to need to come up and polish this up, those outlines. Turn my light box on a little bit. I can get a nice transition of these highlights. So as this is growing, this highlight is kind of following its shape, getting a little bit wider and globular, and it's going to break apart from the mass. And the highlight will dissipate with this little orb that is shrinking now. But yeah, just doing these kind of trippy effect stuff, you can get a finished thing done in a single day. And that'll help, especially like I was saying before, if you're just starting out with animation, it's a little less intimidating. And I mean, this is like 60 frames. You don't even have to do one that's this many frames. But getting anything completed, even if it's like a random type of effects animation, it's very encouraging to have something completed, especially with animation, where say if you were making a short film, like a 3-minute short film, that could easily take several months to a year. Say it's your student, your college thesis, you could spend a really long time on that. Just having something completed, like even if it's just a short little loop, it's very important to be encouraged as an animator, because it can be so daunting and just feel like you spend so much time for just a couple seconds of work, and it is hard, but animation is worthwhile because there's nothing more magical than being able to project your thoughts onto a screen for other people to see. Because we can all think of cool stuff, we can all have really interesting, crazy dreams, but all that stuff just exists in your own head. No one else will ever experience it the way you do. But animation bridges that gap between dreams that are trapped in your head and dreams that you can project into other people's heads, and those dreams can be fused into their dreams, and you're trading dreams back and forth. And I suppose it's similar to reading a book, but of course with a book, the words are rather abstract symbols or suggestions of what to think about, but the author really doesn't have precise control over what the person is envisioning in their head. That's why when you see a movie from a book you read, the movie is always very different than the way you saw it in your head, because the movie is someone else's dream or interpretation of the source material. But with animation, there's no room for misinterpretation. Rather, you're seeing the exact same images, and of course how people experience those images or interpret the meaning of those images is of course more subjective. You're gonna have differences, and that's all good and great and everything, but it's like the closest you can get to literally just putting thoughts from your head into someone else's, like visually, even more so than a painting or a still image, because you can't convey the motion with a still image. Or a comic, like a comic, you can convey a lot of story depth. How long someone actually looks at a panel is still completely up to them. With animation, you have precise control over how long someone looks at something, down to the very frame, and it's the same for every single person that watches it. The clip that you're making exists for 96 frames every single time. It will never not be 96 frames for the end of time. It's an objective fact of reality. Whereas with a comic, a panel might last for 2 seconds for one person. Another person might look at it for half a second because they just want to get on with the story. Another person might look at it for 20 minutes because they're doing a study of that panel and they're analyzing it and redrawing it themselves. So this isn't to say one is superior to the other, but rather that every art form excels at what it excels at. And of course, animation excels at communicating motion. It's the only visual art form that does that, because comics, You can suggest motion in a still image, but you can't actually see the motion. From the Patreon feed, you can download tutorials, and I'm going to be posting a lightning ebook that's going to show you how to draw and animate lightning. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.